Morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us here this morning. We appreciate that. I'm going to make some quick introductions, and then I know that Sheriff John will make some when he gets up here as well. But we have with us this morning the Deputy Attorney General of North Dakota, Claire Ness, is over here. We have BCI, standing next to her, BCI Director Lonnie Gabrowska. Chief Dave Zabolski from the Fargo Police Department. You may have heard of him. Chief Dennis Otternes, also Cass County Sheriff Jesse Johnner is with us today, as North Dakota Highway Patrol Captain Brian Niewind. Did I miss anybody up here? No. We've got Arnie Rummel also from the BCI, Mike Ness from the BCI, and others in the room. Appreciate everybody being here. I just want to start off by saying, before I get into my remarks, we met yesterday. Or actually, I'll start with Friday. We met Friday with the officers, Sergeant Travis Moser, Detective Joshua Heller, Detective Ryan Jasper, and Investigator Jordan Cordy. We met with them. Actually, I had to do it by phone because I was up on the Turtle Mountain Indian Reservation, but was able to meet with them Friday to discuss this matter and the determination that I had reached with regard to this incident that we're going to talk about today. Last night, Sheriff John and myself and a couple of other law enforcement officers met with, again, I had to do that remotely, but met last night with Amy Martinez, Jim Martinez, and Nancy Martinez to let them know what decision I'd reached in this matter, and then also talk with them about any questions that they had for us as a result of what had transpired and the decision that I'd reached about any charging. I think you all understand we're talking about the incident that unfurled on August 1st, 2022, out in Mapleton, North Dakota. There had been a call to the Red River Regional Dispatch. They received a report that morning about shots being fired at a residence in Mapleton, out on 5th Street in Mapleton. Sheriff Johnner is going to go through much more detail on this, but I just want to get you oriented. They received that call that there had been shots fired. Cass County Sheriff's Department personnel responded immediately out to the scene. They were there within minutes and heard additional gunfire after they arrived out there at the scene. Eventually, also North Dakota Highway Patrol and Fargo Police from the street crimes and negotiators also responded in the aftermath of that initial contact. There was contact made with a Mr. Andrew Martinez, age 35, out at that 5th Street residence in Mapleton. The Fargo, I want to mention the four officers, I mentioned their names already, from the Fargo Police Street Crimes Unit: Sergeant Travis Moser, Detective Joshua Heller, Detective Ryan Jasper, and Investigator Jordan Cordy. They responded in the afternoon hours. They responded because the incident was going on throughout this. They responded to a call for mutual assistance to that scene out there on 5th Street in Mapleton. When they got there, they immediately went to the incident command post, which was being led by the incident commander out there on the scene, Sheriff Jesse Johnner. They were briefed. It's important to know what got into their minds as they were being briefed by the incident commander, by Sheriff Johnner. I'm summarizing this obviously, but they learned that Andrew Martinez was inside the premise, that multiple shots had been fired earlier in the day, and that he had shot, Martinez had shot rounds inside the home and outside of the home. The deputies had heard additional shots upon their arrival earlier, as I mentioned, corroborating with the call that had come into the dispatch center. Also, law enforcement on the scene was aware of allegations regarding additional criminal conduct that had taken place allegedly that day. They also importantly learned that Andrew Martinez had a military background. And so that was in their minds, as well as they made tactical decisions throughout the day, and Sheriff Johnner, I'm sure, will be discussing some of that with you. Sheriff Johnner directed the officer movements in accord with the circumstances and with the background of Martinez. A Cass County Sheriff's Office negotiator was in contact throughout this incident with the subject, Mr. Martinez. At some point in the going back and forth, there were phone calls and then they would go off. They'd be off and on the phone with Mr. Martinez. At one point, the officers involved it was conveyed to them that the negotiator, they believed that they heard a sound consistent with the racking of a firearm. They didn't know what kind of a firearm, but the racking sound made chambering around. At some point also in this contact, it was conveyed to all the officers that Martinez, they believed that Martinez was going to be coming out of the residence and that he was armed with a firearm, was going to be bringing the firearm with him. When Martinez did in fact appear at the doorway of that residence, there were a couple of doors. There was the door itself, the standard door, and then also a glass storm door outside of that. He initially appeared, opened the inside door. The glass door remained closed initially, and it could be seen that Martinez was armed with an AR-15 style weapon. At that point, the muzzle of the weapon was pointed skyward as he was holding it. He opened the glass door, he lowered the AR-15 and pointed it in the direction of the officers and the cross-street residents. I know Sheriff John is going to be showing some video here in a bit, and you'll get a sense for just how populated this area was and the danger that existed to the entire community, in addition to the officers at whom Mr. Martinez was directing his AR-15. Sergeant Moser, Detective Jasper, Detective Heller, and Investigator Cordy feared for their lives at this moment. They also feared for the lives of the residents that were surrounding this area. That fear was fact-based on what they were encountering that day, and it was reasonable under all of the circumstances that were present. Those officers engaged and fired their law enforcement weapons at Andrew Martinez. The precise number of rounds is unclear, but it was it was above 20. There were somewhere in the neighborhood of 20, 25, maybe a little bit more total rounds fired from the officers' weapons. Mr. Martinez was struck 5 times by the rounds being fired by the officers. He was struck in the right forearm. He was struck in the left hand. He was struck in his left arm and shoulder area. He also took a round to the abdomen. There was no organ damage from that shot to the abdomen. However, Mr. Martinez was also wounded in the left arm, in it through and through. It went in the left arm, out of the arm, into his body cavity, through his chest. It grazed his liver, perforated his diaphragm, and then his aortic root, causing extensive internal damage. These officers, I want to stress, these officers were systematic in their approach, and they were professional every step of the way. They reasonably feared for their lives as Mr. Martinez emerged into the doorway and aimed his AR-15 in their direction. Sergeant Moser, Detective Heller, Detective Jasper, and Investigator Cordy's resort to deadly force was reasonable, it was justified, and it was lawful under these circumstances. Immediately after these rounds were fired, it was unclear whether Mr. Martinez had retreated back into the residence or had fallen back into the residence. Law enforcement employed a drone that was used to then go up and investigate the scene. The glass door had been shot out at that point, and the drone was able to go inside and or at least gain a vantage and see that Mr. Martinez appeared to be face down in the residence and was not moving. Law enforcement immediately closed in, walked into the scene. CPR, life-saving measures were attempted by the officers, Sergeant Moser, Investigator Cordy, and Sergeant, I think it's Canales from the Sheriff's Department, were the first to administer care to Mr. Martinez, and they attempted to stop the bleeding from the injuries. In addition to the rounds that struck Mr. Martinez, he had some degree of injury from the shards of glass in the wood from around the frame as it was being hit by rounds as well. He took some small superficial injuries to his face and body. The other officers on scene then secured the premises. They went throughout the building. They found one loaded 9mm handgun in one of the bedrooms on a bed. They found multiple firearms also in the residence in a gun safe, but the gun safe was open and accessible. EMS personnel arrived at the scene. They attempted to provide care, but Andrew Martinez succumbed to his injuries and was dead at the scene. Autopsy, in summary. The previously described gunshot wounds, as I've already mentioned, minor fragment injuries as a result of fragmenting rounds hitting the door frame and window, potential glass and other debris causing minor injuries. The cause of death is listed as exsanguination due to gunshot wound to the heart, lung, and aortic root. In essence, he bled to death. That concludes my summary remarks. Next, you're going to hear from the incident commander out there that day, Cass County Sheriff Jesse Johnner. Sheriff?
Good morning. Thank you, Attorney General Wrigley. Thanks for everyone for being here this morning. Before I go over the incident, I want to take a few minutes to thank Attorney General Drew Wrigley and his staff for the excellent communication throughout this investigation and the professionalism that has been displayed by he and his staff with the family, the officers who were involved with the incident, and the Cass County Sheriff's Office staff. I want to thank the North Dakota Bureau of Criminal Investigation for their thorough and professional investigation of this incident. I would like to thank the North Dakota Highway Patrol, West Fargo Police Department, and the Fargo Police Department for their assistance on August 1st, 2022. Most importantly, on behalf of all of our agencies, we want to share our sincere condolences with the family of Andrew Martinez. We were able to, as the Attorney General Wrigley mentioned, visit with them last evening, and as most of you can imagine, this is a very difficult situation for them. Our thoughts and prayers will be with them in the upcoming months, and I ask that we keep them in mind this morning as we conduct this press conference. Our thoughts and prayers are also with the community of Mapleton and the officers who are involved and their families as they have waited patiently and professionally for the investigation to conclude. Anytime that we have loss of life during police intervention, those are difficult situations. Difficult for family members, communities, officers, and their families. Every law enforcement officer who goes into the law enforcement profession knows that there is a possibility that they may have to use deadly force during their careers. But I can assure you that most hope they never have to do that. On August 1st, 2022, a member of the Mapleton community, Andrew Martinez, was shot and killed by lawful police intervention during a shots fired call investigation in Mapleton, North Dakota. I want to go over that information with those here this morning to hopefully answer questions in relation to the incident. In the morning hours of August 1st, 2022, at 10:34 a.m., the Cass County Sheriff's Office was dispatched to Mapleton, North Dakota after dispatch received an anonymous report of shots fired call. At or around the same time, we received a report that an individual located near the area of where the gunshots were heard was experiencing a possible mental health crisis. 3 deputies initially responded to investigate the call. Those deputies were Sergeant Brad Nitschke, Corporal Cole Thompson, and Deputy Thomas Beam, all with the Cass County Sheriff's Office. Corporal Thompson and Deputy Beam parked a distance away for safety and deployed on foot to investigate the gunshots. While on scene and investigating the incident further, they heard 2 more gunshots. At this time, I would like to play video from PowerPoint slide 1. And what you're going to see from this video is both Deputy Beam and Corporal Thompson's body cam footage. You'll see them arriving in the area on foot to investigate the gunshots, and you'll hear further gunshots occur while they're on scene. If we could play that, please. This is Deputy Corporal Cole Thompson's body cam footage.
76 and 71, just so you know, I'm about 2 houses to the east from where the shots were just fired in the backyard.
The video will shortly transition to Deputy Beam's body cam. And this would be Deputy Beam.
Shot fired, shot fired. Second shot fired. Ten four, I've got my rifle with.
And then if we could advance it to show PowerPoint slide 2 at this time. The next one. Okay, so in relation to Mr. Martinez residence, which you can see is right here, this is Corporal Cole Thompson's position, and this would be Deputy Beam's position, so you can see in relation. At this time, we did not know the intention of the gunfire. We didn't know if it was specifically directed towards someone or residents. We didn't know any of that information as they had arrived. Sergeant Nitschke arrived in the area a short time after Corporal Thompson and Deputy Beam and attempted to make contact by phone with the responsible, identified as Andrew Martinez. Deputies Beam and Thompson began to set up a perimeter in order to contain Mr. Martinez and to help prevent anyone else in the area from getting hurt. In addition, a Cass Clay alert was sent out to Mapleton residents to shelter in place. Our main concern at the time was the safety of those residing in the immediate area. So at this time, if we could show PowerPoint slide number 3. So again, we have Mr. Martinez residence here, and any place where there's an X in this immediate area were residents that were occupied at the time that this gunfire was occurring. So you can see that we have people in close proximity to this incident. In fact, we would later learn that one of Mr. Martinez's next door neighbors heard what they believed to be gunshots and looked out her residence, at which time she observed Mr. Martinez holding a handgun. She described him as appearing to be intoxicated. Another individual who lived near Mr. Martinez's residence came to the scene after learning of the incident and stated that his son, who was at home in their residence, again, which was close to Mr. Martinez's residence, was not answering his phone, and he was concerned about his son's safety. I was alerted to the situation a short time after it was reported, and given the nature of the call, I responded to the scene, where I eventually assumed the role of incident commander. I also at this time requested assistance from the North Dakota Highway Patrol, the Red River Regional UAS drone team, which is made up of West Fargo and Fargo Police Departments, Cass County Sheriff's Office, Fargo and West Fargo Fire Departments, and also requested at that time the assistance of the Metro Area Street Crimes Unit, who is made up of Fargo, West Fargo, Cass County agencies, and I staged Sanford ambulance close to the scene for any medical emergencies. The request for other agency assistance was made because at the time of the call, we only had 6 patrol units available to respond to the incident and answer other calls for service as they came in throughout the county. One of my priorities as incident commander amongst many was to send additional personnel to perimeter positions to keep everyone safe in that area. I sent members of the Metro Area Street Crimes Unit to take up a position to the south and east of the Martinez residence. That unit consisted of Sergeant Travis Mosier, Detective Joshua Heller, Detective Ryan Jasper, and Investigator Jordan Corty. Just a real quick explanation on the makeup of the Metro Area Street Crimes Unit. I think most are probably aware, but just to go over that again, it's made up from those agencies that I just mentioned. All members on that unit are deputized by me through the Cass County Sheriff's Office. There was a mutual aid request made by myself to have them come out there. The reason that was done is because our Metro Area Street Crimes Unit is a unit that isn't assigned to a specific task other than to work on critical incidents that may be occurring at the time, individuals within our area that are causing criminal activity to occur. And so I summoned them as an additional resource. One of my individuals who's on the Metro Area Street Crimes Unit, Deputy Nathan Borboom, was already at the scene, and he was in communication with the Metro Area Street Crimes Unit and indicating that the situation was occurring and that we could use some possible additional assistance as well. In addition, I sent different less lethal platforms to each position so we would have less lethal options. And so at this time, if we could show PowerPoint slide 4. So this gives an indication of where everyone would be at this point now as our Metro Area Street Crimes Unit arrived. We got Deputy Beam, Sergeant Jesse Castle, Sergeant Travis Mosier, Detective Josh Heller, who had a view through this area to the residence. This is the Martinez residence here at 501. And Investigator Cordy and Detective Jasper were sent to our search and rescue vehicle, which was now parked out in front of the residence. And we had Deputy Noonan, who was assigned to operate that vehicle. And that was his sole mission, was to move that vehicle around. And then I had Detective Jake Wiedemann, who was also at that vehicle, and he was assigned with less lethal option. That was his responsibility. Any questions on those locations? Just wanted to give you an idea of where everyone was located at that point. And then if we could also show PowerPoint slide number 5. And this is going to be the viewpoint. This is Mr. Martinez residence right here. This is going to be the door here where the rifle is going to eventually emerge. This is our search and rescue vehicle, and this is where the viewpoint would be from Investigator Cordy and Detective Jasper's location. Negotiations continued with Mr. Martinez, and I would describe those negotiations as up and down. And what I mean by that is there were times where those negotiations went really well, and there were other times where Mr. Martinez would not answer his phone and he would not talk with us. That's what I mean by that. Most of those negotiation attempts were done by phone. There was one interaction and attempt to get Mr. Martinez to surrender when he came out to the north side of the residence. So at this time, if we could play video PowerPoint slide number 6. And this is going to be, again, so Mr. Martinez is going to come out to the north side of the residence, back onto the back, as it was described, the back porch area. And officers on scene attempted to negotiate with him successfully and have them come to their location and visit with officers about what was occurring that morning. So if we could play that video.
Right, Greg is on the back porch. We're getting copy. We're in the 3 set. He's getting followed along. Andrew, this is the police. Can you come over to us? Can you put your hands up and come over to us over this fence? Andrew, we don't want to hurt you. We just want to talk to you, right? Can you come over here and step over this fence?
Right hand's clear. Can't see his left hand.
Andrew, can you hear me? Can you walk over to us, please?
Left hand's clear.
Left hand's clear.
Right hand's clear.
Andrew, can you walk to us? Andrew. Can you put your hands up and walk towards us?
Yep.
This is left hand,
It's fine. Just
Andrew, we
behind
just
it.
want to talk to you, man. We just want to take you and get you looked at today. That's all, right? Would you be willing to do that? We're not here to hurt you. We don't want to hurt you. We want to get you some help.
Left hand is still clear.
Can we do that, Andrew? Would you step out in the backyard and just lay down for us and we'll come talk to you?
Ball in his left hand.
What's that? I can't hear you with the air conditioner running, Andrew. You just step out in the yard and we'll come talk to you? What's that? Can we do that, Andrew? Can you just step down into the yard and we'll come talk to you? Come on, man. Don't go back inside. Stay out here and talk to me. All right, hold on.
Now, at that time, Mr. Martinez retreats back into the residence. After a long period of negotiating and several attempts to get the responsible to come out of Mr. Martinez to come out of the residence unarmed, Mr. Martinez told negotiators several times that he would be coming outside with a firearm. At some point during those negotiations, those speaking with him indicated that they heard what may have been a slide racking from a firearm. Mr. Martinez was asked several times to not exit with a firearm, that it may put others in danger. And how I would describe that interaction, because the person that was visiting with or negotiating with Mr. Martinez was in very close proximity to where I was. And that person that was negotiating with him was asking him several times over and over, or stating to him, please do not come out with a rifle. Please do not come out with a gun. And it was repeated to him over and over. And I heard those plea attempts from that negotiator. And as I mentioned, it was repeated several times. And she was extremely trying as hard as she could to have him not come out with a weapon. At that time, Mr. Martinez opened the door and pointed a rifle out the door in the direction of officers. Sergeant Mosier, Detective Jasper, Detective Heller, and Investigator Cordy fired their weapons at Mr. Martinez. And if we could play the next video. Before we play that, just real quick, so I want to kind of give everyone an idea of what we're looking at here, so you have a good perspective. So we have, in this location, we're going to have Sergeant Travis Mosier and Detective Josh Heller. And this is going to be from in between those buildings, as I showed you earlier, looking directly at this door. So it's going to be over in this area here, the door that the weapon is going to protrude from. And then again, in this area, we have Investigator Cordy and Detective Ryan Jasper. And this is their perspective. This is ECI's video, and it's zoomed in on the front door to give you a perspective so you can see that weapon protruding out of the door, and then again to give a perspective from what each location was seeing at that time. So if we could play that at this time. So that is what the officers witnessed and saw, as that rifle coming out of the door and protruding, and you heard the officers give commands to drop that weapon. After the gunfire, officers on scene could no longer see Mr. Martinez, and we did not know if Mr. Martinez had been struck by gunfire at that time. I immediately requested a drone to fly close to the residence to see if we could see Mr. Martinez, to determine if it would be safe for officers to approach the residence. At that time, we could see someone lying on the floor just inside the doorway, so officers approached and entered the residence. Officers secured the residence and began life-saving measures, which were eventually taken over by medical personnel on scene. Mr. Martinez was pronounced deceased. At that time, I requested the scene to be secured and turned the scene over to the North Dakota Bureau of Criminal Investigation. Again, as I stated in my opening comments, this is a very tragic situation, not only for the family, but for the officers involved and those officers who were at the scene. Those officers and their families will carry this situation with them for the rest of their lives. I have visited with these officers at different times, and I want to commend them on their professionalism and their patience while awaiting the conclusion of this investigation. I have worked with each of these officers in different capacities over my years in law enforcement, and I know them to be well-trained and professional. I know some questions have surfaced reference the negotiator who spoke with Mr. Martinez during this incident, and I want to quickly provide information about her. The deputy that conducted the negotiations with Mr. Martinez has been with the Cass County Sheriff's Office since 2008. That person has been a member of the Red River Valley SWAT Team's negotiations unit since 2015 and has successfully negotiated and de-escalated several critical incidents successfully over her time on the team. In fact, on May 19th, 2021, WDAY did a story on this person and her successful negotiation of a stabbing suspect in downtown Fargo. In addition, this deputy is a coach for crisis intervention training, where she instructs and trains other officers in crisis intervention methods. Crisis intervention team training is part of a collaborative community partnership intensive training between law enforcement and mental health providers, emergency services, and individuals with mental illness. This training encompasses real-life scenarios where officers learn to communicate and de-escalate behaviors in these types of situations. Some of this deputy's additional training includes crisis intervention in 2011, critical incident management in 2012, crisis intervention again in 2015, URRV negotiations conference 2016, officer well-being in 2020, education and skills for working in high-stress incidents in 2021, emotional and psychological disorders in 2021, assisting individuals in crisis 2021, group crisis intervention 2021, and continues 4-hour monthly training with the SWAT negotiations team monthly. Again, I want to thank Attorney Drew Wrigley and his staff for their thorough work in completing this review. These reviews are not easy and are taxing on staff. With the Attorney General's decision into this matter, the Cass County Sheriff's Office will finish its remaining investigation and administrative review of the incident. In order to maintain transparency, the Cass County Sheriff's Office will make items accessible through normal release of information laws, practices, and procedures once everything is completed. Finally, in closing, I want to thank our community for the support they have shown throughout this incident. I have had several interactions with our citizens over the past several weeks, and many of them have mentioned that they are praying for Mr. Martinez's family and for our officers and their families. With that, I'm going to open it up for questions.
If you had to give a letter grade everyone involved in the situation, what letter grade would you give and why?
I don't know what your letter grade would consist of. I feel that the response in this situation was the appropriate response. I feel that everyone on the scene acted professionally. I feel that everyone on the scene did the best that they could to try to resolve this situation without anyone getting hurt. Certainly when you have situations like this, you go back and you debrief them, and you figure and you look at ways that maybe you could do things differently. And are there different ways of doing things? Most certainly. But I feel like myself being there as the incident commander, that we tried to do what we could to bring this to a peaceful conclusion.
Thanks, Sheriff. And one more follow-up. What is it like for you to be personally involved in this type of situation, this type of crisis?
The reason that I responded to the scene was to be there to assist in whatever way I could. I mentioned that we only had a few deputies out that day, and I knew that the incident seemed to be maybe escalating initially. I spent 17 years with Red River Valley SWAT team and left there as the assistant commander, and I felt like my knowledge in assisting with critical incidents could help officers on the scene. I think that, most certainly I was happy that I could be there with them because this was a difficult situation for a lot of people involved. And to be able to be there right on scene and offer support however I could, to offer resources however I could, was important to me. And it's a tough situation for everyone involved. We talk about the number of mental health crises that we have in the community, and they seem to be escalating. And certainly anytime that you have a situation like this, and you're trying to plead with someone to successfully come to a peaceful conclusion, and that doesn't happen, that affects a lot of people's lives. And as much as I stated in here earlier, this is going to affect a number of people for a long time, some of them for maybe the rest of their life. And so it's a difficult situation, but I'm glad that I could be there so that I can offer assistance going forward. And anyone who might question this, so I can take that burden off of our officers. I was in charge of the scene. I take responsibility for what happened there that day.
Thank you.
So,
Bailey?
Can you shed some light on the investigation that you kind of alluded to since this happened, the criminal investigation, allegations that you guys started investigating that may have happened prior to this incident that may have led to the mental health crisis?
sure. Thanks, Bailey, for that question. There were a number of different things that we were investigating. Most definitely the shots, obviously, that we had responded to, right? That was the first thing that we were investigating and responding to. And then there was some other alleged activity that occurred at the residence prior to us getting there. I can't elaborate on that any further than that at this time. So, yes.
You mentioned multiple guns were found in Mr. Martinez's house. How many, what type of guns, and were they obtained legally?
I do not have an answer to all those questions because I did not conduct the investigation. Would that be possible to answer from someone who conducted the investigation? Because I turned it over, so I don't.
Mr. Wrigley, would you
Yeah,
be
there
able
was-
to answer that?
I don't have an full accounting of all the weapons that were down there. We may have that. I did mention the loaded 9mm firearm that was found. I think that was on the ground floor in a bedroom. And then the other weapons were located in the premises, were down in the gun safe that was open. And one remaining weapon, and I'll be corrected if this isn't right. Most important thing is we get this is that was obviously the AR-15, which was laying right next to Mr. Martinez when officers entered the premises. That weapon was laying right next to him, or maybe even partially underneath him from when he fell. But we don't have any information that the weapons were gained illegally. and that he was a prohibited person.
Is that AR-15 loaded?
His AR-15, I think all the rounds have been fired through that weapon. I think that that's correct. The 9mm remained loaded, or had been loaded again, I should say too. All possible. But there are no remaining rounds in the AR.
As far as communications, did he ever say why he was firing those weapons or what type of mental health crisis he was suffering from?
I don't believe that that was relayed directly. We had, through our communication with Mr. Martinez, we had some indications that some of the activity that had occurred at the residence prior to us getting there may have caused some of the behavior. And again, I can't disclose all the alleged activity that occurred there prior to us arriving.
Kind of a follow-up to the video being released. Is there any intentions on releasing the phone calls with officers and Mr. Martinez to the public?
So when everything is concluded, and with and us shoring up all the investigative pieces, both at our office and through the Attorney General's office, all of our information will be made available through open records requests and normal procedures. I do not know the extent of the recording of all the phone calls with Mr. Martinez. So some of those may have been captured, some maybe not. A majority of, I shouldn't say majority, but some of those phone calls I was able to overhear from time to time because that negotiator was visiting with Mr. Martinez in very close proximity to where incident command was located. And most definitely the conversations that I made mention to April with the negotiator pleading with Mr. Martinez to not come out of the residence with a firearm. So.
Is there a timeline for all that information being completed and released?
I can't give you a specific date and time right now. I'll need to go back to our office and see what we need to shore up in order to make that or give you that. As far as the Attorney General's office, I wouldn't have that information. So.
Thank you. You had mentioned that there was some previous criminal activity that day. Forgive me if you had already mentioned this, but has there been, or was there a previous record criminal activity associated with Mr. Martinez prior to that day? Any previous history?
I think there had been some contacts with law enforcement, but nothing of major concern. So.
Can I add something? I don't want to get past this, Tasha, your question about the AR. It's important. It's been mentioned that they heard the distinctive sound, what they believe to be the chambering of a round. And for anyone who's not familiar, the chambering of a round you do on a semi-automatic weapon. When you put the clip in, to get the first round to load the gun, to get one prepared to shoot, you have to chamber that first round, and it's called racking it. And a semi-automatic handgun, which is what was found located on the premises, that sound would be consistent with that. It's the same sound consistent with the AR-15. Would also have to have that first round chambered. Law enforcement, of course, wasn't inside and would have no way to know what kind of a weapon had just been chambered. It's a small point, but your question is an interesting one, and I just want to make sure that we put that out there. The other thing is that I didn't mention, and Sheriff, forgive me if you did, but these the officer engagement for independent officers making independent judgments was almost simultaneous when that weapon came out, and it came down in the position that it was aimed directly in the position of the officers. 4 officers almost simultaneously made independent judgments, sizing up everything they knew at that point and what Mr. Martinez was doing with the firearm and how menacing that was.
And if I could even add to that a little bit more, whether, the discussion of how many rounds may have been in that particular weapon, officers aren't going to know that on the scene. All they know is that a weapon was pointed in their direction, and we, as law enforcement, do not train to wait to see what happens, because lives can be lost at that point. And so I don't know if that helps clarify your question as well or not. Yep. Go ahead, Nick.
Were family members of Mr. Martinez ever given the opportunity to speak with him during negotiations? And is that something that's normally allowed or disallowed during these tense negotiations?
Yep, that's a great question, Nick. So when this incident occurred, there was communication with the father of Mr. Martinez, and some of that was happening unbeknownst to law enforcement. Some was happening and we were aware of it. And so Mr. Martinez's father and brother arrived at the scene. They not believe they were asked to come there by law enforcement, but they were arrived because they were made aware of the situation. And so they arrived on the scene and they had conversed with Mr. Martinez at different times. Eventually, that communication, or we had asked Mr. Martinez's father and brother to not do that communication anymore and to allow our negotiator to fully visit with Mr. Martinez. They were still on scene and questions were being asked of family members to help in those negotiation methods, but we didn't want Mr. Martinez to be calling a bunch of different people and passing different information along to people other than law enforcement that we were not aware of, because we wanted to get real-time information on critical pieces of information that could be safety pieces to those living in the immediate area and to officers on scene. So for example, if Mr. Martinez mentioned something that he may be going to do and it was mentioned to a family member, not to law enforcement, and we didn't have that knowledge, that could cause law enforcement to react in a way that maybe we wouldn't want them to react, or maybe in a way that we wanted them to react, but we just wanted to have real-time information as we were getting it so we could make sure that we could kind of be in control of the scene and try to bring the situation to a successful resolution. So.
A neighbor had mentioned that Mr. Martinez had appeared intoxicated. Did any autopsy afterward show anything in terms of what might have been in his system at the time?
Good question, too. The autopsy showed, it was referred to as acute intoxication. The blood alcohol content, forgive me, it was not clear to me as I was looking at the numbers on there. They were listing it in a different characterization than the BAC that we're all so familiar with, but they referred to it in there as acute intoxication.
Alcohol?
Yep, alcohol, yes, sir.
What does acute mean? Like,
A lot.
A lot?
Significant intoxication, yes. You know what I will do is I'll make a point of getting on the phone this morning with the folks and just try to get a little more clarity on the numbers that they have listed in there and define that for you. I'm not trying to be cute by defining acute that way, but I mean that's their reference is that it's quite significant, and I'll get the equivalent of the BAC for you.
This may be a question for Chief Cebulski, but how are officers trained to respond to people who come out with AR-15s? And I ask this because some people may question whether that many shots were needed to be fired.
In terms of use of force training, our officers are trained to address the threat. As we said before, when it's a firearm, there is not necessarily time for de-escalation or discussion. You have an individual here who's already fired off this gun. And this is a complex situation, as Sheriff Johnner described, where we have our perimeter folks and we have our crisis negotiator, people who are trying to negotiate a safe resolution to this, and they are in contact with each other. And as he explained, the negotiator was emphatically asking this individual not to come out with the gun. So as soon as we know that's happening, the officers see the gun, as the AG pointed out, the gun's leveled in the direction of officers. They're left with little choice but to respond in a deadly force manner to protect themselves and to protect others in the community. that's in alignment with not only an objectively reasonable standard, but our training.
And the Martinez family is asking for more training, and they feel that officers could have done more to prevent this tragedy. How would you respond to that?
First, April, I did not know that they had made those comments.
Yeah, they just
So-
sent out a press release probably
Okay.
about the same time this is happening.
Okay, and could you give me that, what they mentioned one more time?
Yeah, so I'll just read it out loud. The Martinez family calls on our local policing bodies to reevaluate how they respond to people experiencing a mental health crisis and ensure officers are trained to de-escalate best practices so that no other family must experience this tragedy. Goes on further to say, we are saddened to learn that the Attorney General has decided the police officers' use of force was justified. We recognize and appreciate the effort made to peacefully resolve the terrible situation that day, but knowing that Andrew was in crisis and not in his right mind, we wish that more would have been done to prevent that tragic outcome.
Well, a couple of things. First of all, again, as I mentioned earlier, I think that, you know, we're constantly going to reevaluate, you know, how we do things. That's not because of one particular incident. As we train and go forward in law enforcement, we always want to try to be forward-thinking and think of better ways that we can respond to things and handle those types of situations. That's going to be constant, and that doesn't matter if it's West Fargo Police Department, the Fargo Police Department, or the Cass County Sheriff's Office. I feel very confident in our training in this area with all the agencies I just mentioned. I've had an opportunity to train in different parts of the country based on my law enforcement career, and I feel like the law enforcement training that we get in this area is very good, and that each agency here is very, very good in sending officers to additional training to try to get the most recent and different practices that come out to make our officers better. I feel like the way that we handled this situation was appropriate with the training that everyone had, that the resources that we had available to us. I feel that there were several attempts to try to conclude this successfully, peacefully, without anyone getting hurt. And you know, as far as training, we're always going to look for different trainings to de-escalate situations. And I think that we did the best that we could with the circumstances. And you know, the thing that pops into my mind is maybe some intervention methods that could have occurred before law enforcement was called to the scene that day, to try to get some help for Mr. Martinez.
I'm gonna add this, if I might, though. From the assessment of our office in assessing the legality of the action that's taken in its entirety, it should not escape anybody that you have this situation going on for many hours from the time that the shots were first fired, which mental health crises, very serious matter, and it's something that people are empathetic and sympathetic to. But it's not difficult to see, and happens all too often, that it morphs from a mental health crisis into a life and death circumstance for officers, inescapably. They can't simply walk away from the premises. A man is contained in a residence, is conducting himself in a very threatening fashion, firing outside and inside the premises. They know him to be armed, and they know that he's not dealing with them. He's not complying with their instructions to de-escalate the situation. They were left with no alternative. They have people living all around the area. If the implication is that they could have just driven away, well, yeah, sure they could have. They could have driven away. And they would leave in the wake a person who had been contained, now wasn't contained, who has a firearm, who might now leave the residence, who might be a danger to, reasonably assumed to be a danger to those around him and everyone involved. No, this was classic police work engaging someone, they've got someone with a mental health crisis that starts out that way and morphs rapidly and stays continuously as a life and death circumstance for the officers and for the people living in that area. That's inescapable. There was one other matter I wanted to mention on that. Forgive me, I go back to my, yeah. We met with the family last night, and we had a very cordial and nice discussion with them. It was constructive. I compliment them. They saw the videos for the first time and were being provided with information that they didn't have before. They've not seen all of the video involved in this matter and don't have the full context. And listening to your remarks there, I can't help but think that as they gain even additional context going forward, that they will, it might change their remarks to some degree. But that said, it's not lost on any of us. They're in a very, very difficult circumstance. And they've lost their loved one, and they have questions, and we attempted to answer those as we could last night. But I think it's really important to keep that overarching matter squarely in mind in all of this. Yes, it is a mental health crisis. Yes, it was being driven probably by that in a combination with intoxication. But you can't escape the reality that it was a life and death circumstance brought on by Mr. Martinez. And law enforcement had no alternative but to keep Mr. Martinez, to keep him in the circumstances, to keep him contained. And Sheriff Johnner went through the expertise of the person who was interacting with Mr. Martinez and doing everything possible to try to de-escalate the circumstances and make it end peacefully without harm to anyone, including Mr. Martinez. Bailey, you were next. I had your hand. Yeah.
But do you guys have a protocol? I mean, not to counter the Martinez family, but to counter them. I mean, do you guys have a protocol of when you would leave a situation like this? Is that even something you guys would do?
Yeah, so so this I think will intertwine with both yours and April's question. So again, I was the incident commander on scene. I think where we're going with this question is, could we have left and would it have changed the outcome? Number one, we couldn't have left. Just going to say that. This individual had come out of their residence and they had fired a weapon. At the time that we responded, we had no idea who this person had fired the weapon at, if they hadn't fired it at anyone, or if they had just fired it in the air. We did not know that. Okay? I showed you the map up here of the residents that we had that were occupied with other individuals living in that area. We had a father who came to the incident and was concerned for his son's safety because he had tried to reach his son and was unable to do so. Like Attorney General Wrigley said, if we drove away, what if that individual came out of the house and hurt someone else? Our sole mission and what we were trying to accomplish that day was to provide public safety to everyone who was living in that area. That was our number one priority. Our next priority after that was to successfully negotiate with Mr. Martinez to try to conclude that situation safely and peacefully. We were not going to leave. This is not a situation where someone called in and they said that they were going through a mental health crisis and had not shown any propensity for violence, had not fired off a firearm from their residence. In that situation, may we have responded differently? Possibly. We may have had a deputy drive to that area, again, to make sure that no one else would get hurt, and we would have attempted at that point to get that person services, whatever those services may be. This situation was different because this individual had fired off a weapon inside city limits where other people are occupying residences, and we can't have that. Again, my condolences go out to Mr. Martinez's family. I understand that this is a grieving time for them. It's a grieving time for everyone. But this would not, the decision to stay there and work through this situation was a decision that had to be done because we needed to make sure that no one else was going to get hurt.
I guess I have one more question. First off, when will the video
So everything that you saw today, April, obviously everyone's seen that, so it's available. I just have to figure out how to get it out on, so more of a logistical thing and how do we make it available, however that happens. I'm not as computer savvy as some people, so I'm gonna have to visit with a few other people that know that, so, okay?
And as a follow-up to that, and I know we're working with different departments, but, in the Netterville shooting, we did see the officer fire the, weapon. I noticed that here, we didn't show the guns, the shots fired. Why was that decision made to not show that?
Most certainly. It was out of respect for the family. The family hasn't seen all the videos yet, and so it was out of respect for the family and some concerns that the family had last evening when they spoke with us.
Did they mention that they didn't want to see that?
No, they fully, when we visited with last night, they want to see everything that you're asking for. We just hadn't had a chance to, we didn't want to release that last evening before we had an opportunity to do the press conference today. And I don't think it would have been fair to them to see that this morning here. And again, with some of the concerns that they had mentioned to me.
Kind of following up on the procedural question about today's selected video clips, you'd mentioned that those might be made available soon in their raw file form, however you want to word it. Is that something we'd have to put in a public records request for, or will that be sent directly to the press once it's ready?
Yeah, we would release that based on what we do with our normal procedures and how we release that information, so.
Is there a reason that we don't know the exact number or a more precise number of the shots that were fired by the officers?
Yeah, well, familiarity with the AR-15, I think, helps out a little bit. They've got a large capacity clip that law enforcement uses. It'll hold 30 rounds. You could also conceivably put the clip in, you could chamber a round, and then you could put another one in there and be up to 31. A lot of officers will put in some number less because there's not as much compression on the spring in the clip, and you don't have jamming problems and some other matters that can occur. So it's not like it's a revolver and it's got six rounds and everybody does it the same. Also, you might do a tactical switch out and you may put in another clip halfway through. They went out and collected, when BCI got to the scene and took on the investigation, they go out, of course, to each of the positions where the officers are shooting from, and they collect all of the brass, all of the casings but you can't always find them. I know this from being a sportsman, you can't always find them and trying to do what they can. So we don't have a way to get it precisely, but we can get awfully dang close. And it's in the 20s total. They went to where the officers, it was just these 4 officers who engaged Mr. Martinez with their firearms, and they collected all the casings that they could find, and it's north of 20, I would say south of 30, but that's roughly the number. A couple of the officers shot just a couple of rounds, it appeared, and a couple of officers shot more.
What kind of weapons did officers have? And more specifically, what kind of weapons did they shoot?
AR-15s.
They shot AR-15s?
They shot AR-15s, 223 rounds.
So the same weapon that Mr. Netterville had?
Yes.
Did Mr. Netterville fire any rounds?
Not Mr. Martinez. Yeah.
Mr. Martinez, did he fire any rounds at officers when he came out of the house?
At that instant, no. But as Sheriff Johnner said earlier, it wasn't clear at all where rounds were being directed. But when he came out in that instance, no. He had the gun up. The barrel aimed skyward, and then the other officers all, with some different language, they all described the same thing. That barrel came down. It was in the direction of the officers, and there can't be a more aggressive stance taken than that. Directing that, I mean, you've been in the house, you've been discharging that or other weapons inside the house, outside the house, over the course of this. Now you've walked out, and law enforcement, through their negotiator, has been pleading with him not to exit the residence with the gun. Because as the sheriff points out, nobody has to wait to see what happens when someone's pointing a gun at them under these circumstances, and the law enforcement officers didn't. It's not inconsequential and unimportant that all 4 of these officers, all 4 of them made the same assessment of the risk at that moment based on everything they knew and what Mr. Martinez was doing. lowering that gun. One described it as lowering it Rambo style in their direction, and the officers engaged. Bailey.
Either chief or sheriff, you just talk about you can't wait and see. Can you also talk about in a situation like that that's evolving so rapidly, officers can't say, I'm going to be the one to shoot. I mean, there's not one officer could have said, I'm going to do this. This is something that collectively they all just decide at one time, correct?
These are tense and rapidly evolving situations. And yeah, I mean, I think with everything that you have going on when that type of threat is posed towards you, you develop different senses, tunnel vision, things like that. And I think it would be impractical for someone to say, hey, I'm going to do this, you don't do that, whatever. There's not enough time. It's rapidly evolving.
Circling back to Bailey's earlier question about the criminal activity, you mentioned you can't elaborate on that. Why is that?
For protection of the one of the persons that potentially was involved in that situation. And Marcy's law applies to that particular situation.
So will that ever be divulged in public?
I don't believe so, unless that person reverts that Marcy's, the invocation that they did with Marcy's law.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Marcy's law says that it protects the identity or not even the name, but the location, identifying information. But I don't believe it would protect, like, maybe the details of what happened.
Well, under these circumstances right now, what's being protected is the first part of that. The sheriff and I have gone through a tremendous amount of detail about what took place that day. That allegation itself, allegedly involving an individual who's invoked the protections of Marcy's law, I'll give you this assurance. We'll continue to look at that for the possibility that invoking of Marcy's law might have narrower scope. If there's some way for us to provide more, I don't know. We'd be proactive about that. You wouldn't have to call us each week. But if we got to a point where we felt that it was narrower, and there was additional information that we could share, I don't know what else anyone would glean from today with regard to the sheriff, myself, and the other law enforcement leaders here. We're transparent people. We're being transparent with you about everything that took place that day, and that's a constitutional protection, Marcy's law, and it's a matter of consequence for us in our performance of our work, and then also what it protects. So we'll continue to assess that, April. We'll be proactive about that. If there's something that we feel can be and should be, I want to make sure you understand what I'm saying. Constitutionally should be, not Drew Wrigley thinks it should be. That we'll proactively make the media aware of that. Hope that helps a little.
My last question is, when will the 4 officers go back on the streets for part of police?
We'll be completing our internal administrative review of their use of force. So as soon as that's done, then we'll be able to get them ready to go back out. I'm not sure on the exact timeline yet. This is a little different in terms of our involvement as an assisting agency. So we're reviewing all of that information now.
I guess I do have one final question. You mentioned having proactive proactive intervention when it comes to mental health. I think we're all aware that North Dakota is lacking in services. So I guess what can the state do to maybe advance those services? I know that's a pretty broad question, but I'm just
Sure.
curious what you would like to see.
I don't know what the scope of what that would look like, but you're correct, April. You've got a good handle on the fact that there seems to be a little bit of maybe some deficiencies in some of the maybe services or what can be offered to people. At the last legislative session, I actively legislated or talked on legislation on making sure that we don't decrease the services that we currently have, because that was some legislation that was proposed at that session, and I actively lobbied against that and also testified against that, because I feel like right now is not a good time, obviously, to decrease mental health services. And so what I can tell you is that we, West Fargo Police Department, Fargo Police Department, Sanford Health, several other community entities that provide mental health services have been meeting on a regular basis to try to figure out what a solution might be to that and how we can get better services for mental health resources to individuals. And I'm always willing to advocate for that, and especially at a legislative level. But I think it does need to come, much like you said, at more of on the state level and the legislative level. And so I don't know what that looks like. If you're looking for the roadmap potentially, or possibly, I don't know what that looks like. But I do know that we need to continue to advocate to try to get some more services that way. Anything else from anyone?
Thanks for your questions today, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank